Welcome to another video by Pharos Technology. Today, I want to tell you a story that was about the birth of the database and what it took to get databases to where it is today. So come along. It started with the paper ledgers, of course, but I don't want to go that far back in the story. Well, paper ledgers eventually subsided, and finance people around the world had these wonderful spreadsheets that they could use. And here was kind of an example of what would happen in the spreadsheets. You'd see they'd put their column titles here. They'd create a customer ID. This one's 3 letters of the first word and 2 letters of the second word of the company name. They'd have ID orders that they would probably manually create on the fly in order to kind of identify the orders that came about. They had the contacts and the titles and the cities and all the address information, where they're going to ship to and what the weight was and how much it cost. Well, eventually that got to be pretty tiresome because simply put, these spreadsheets duplicating a paper ledger would literally have duplicate after duplicate after duplicate. And they're constantly inputting the same information over and over and over again. And so that got a little tiresome. So they invented databases. And these databases were supposed to help people. So in the early 60s, late 1950s, they started creating databases where they could house this, and the database would be able to be much faster and do reports. And basically it looked like that. Does that look familiar? It looks exactly like the spreadsheet. Well, they called these flat file databases, which really weren't much better than a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets were two-dimensional. They were basically flat files. They still had the same repetitive nature. So along in the mid-1970s, they were trying to solve this problem. So Boyce and Codd, 2 different people, came up with normal forms. They had the first normal form, second normal form, third normal form. And what they tried to accomplish was how to tell technicians that created databases how to lay out the data so that it was the most efficient possible. So what they tried to do is get rid of redundancy. So let's show you a little bit of redundancy here. Here they had orders by the same company name. If you were manually inputting those things, you would have had to input these company names over and over again, along with their address, along with the sales representative's name, the order, and all the information. So what you wanted to do is come up with a method to get rid of all of the duplication of data. So let's look at the pathway that you take when you're going into a job, let's say, and all they have is these massive spaghetti networked spreadsheets where they tied all this data together and tried to make sense of it, but didn't have the technology of a database. So let's look at how we would do that, okay? So let's say that we have this particular table here. And this particular table, you see, as we scroll over to the right, it's not too many fields, but we have an order ID here and the order date, and the customer is Uptown Books, and they ordered 2 Easy Sushi, 10 Hog Wild Over Ham, and 5 Beanie Weenies, okay? So those are cookbooks, by the way. And so these cookbooks, oddly named as they are, the first problem was that, for example, this record has 3 different books in the same field. So basically, first normal form says separate that out. Don't have multiple pieces of data in the same field. Have those separated into different fields. Okay, we can do that. So let's see what that looks like. So we go to the next level, and we have now separated the quantity of Easy Sushi separate from the quantity of Hog Wild Over Ham and the quantity of Beanie Weenie. And if we have 4 books sold, we could actually put a 4th book on that particular order. So we have successfully separated them, but this wasn't too useful either. We have separated it, made it a little bit easier to report on. As long as you had 1 book ordered, you got a good flush bit of data. If you looked at the orders where there were 2 books ordered, you had to skip over the orders that didn't have any books, a second book ordered. Reporting was cumbersome at that point, okay? So let's take that next step. You would then separate those into their own table, okay? So how do we get the items ordered separated? Well, let's go ahead and look at the next level here. So book orders 3, now we have this order separated into its 3 separate books. And now we have different orders, same order date, same customer, and now we've got the books separate. Now that makes a little bit of sense. But the problem is we've got these customers repeated. Now, the second normal form says we need to get rid of repeating data in the record set. So at this point in time, now that we've gotten rid of the data, multiple pieces of data in one field, now we have multiple records that need to be separated into their own tables. Uptown Books needs to have its own table called customers. So let's look at this one. So now what we're going to do is the customer is this bookstore. So now we've got different customers. Customer number 1 ordered 10 of that ham book and 5 of the sushi book and 7 of that other book. Okay, the book ID here was 1, 2, and 3. So now we took 2 different steps here. We said, how about getting all of the data separated for bookstores and books? And if we look back at here, we see that books were actually repeated several times too, like Smokin' Hams had a couple different orders there. So now we separate them into their own book IDs here. And we can then work, and here's book 14, both the same, different quantities for the different orders. Okay, so we're moving ahead. We're making progress here. Now, what happens here now is we've got an order and we've got customers that need to order. Now, those are the bookstore IDs. So let's see what we did on the next one. To get it in third normal form, now we've got to identify each record by a primary key. So let's look and see what they did here. So now we have different orders, and now we've linked them together. The order ID here and the bookstore ID here. We've separated out, notice over here we had the book ID along with the order ID. We now separate those out so that we can now see them, the order ID linked to the book order detail ID. So now we can see the detail linked to each order. Each order links to the ID, the detail, and each order in the header now has the bookstore ID. Now, what you do then is you make sure that all of the data is in each of the tables, and then you link them all together. So let's look. Table Bookstores has all of our bookstores. So when we go to here and look at bookstore number, table ID here, and this bookstore number 1, we see that they are Uptown Books. We go to table books and we see this is our list of books. When we go to this table here, we can see the book ID here, and we go to the books, we can see the book ID now embedded here, and we can link to the table books to get the detail data. So what you do is you take all of this data and you basically deconstruct it so that when you put together a query, the query puts all of this data together to report on, but it doesn't have to do it in a redundant nature. So it doesn't have Uptown Books mentioned a bazillion times in a single table. You can just reference it and have an ID field that's mentioned a bazillion times for that example, and then you can just refer to it. Same with table books. You have the book ID that can refer to the book, and you can very quickly order or put whatever quantity of ID number 1, and then when you do your report, it knows what ID number 1 is. So that's the way you normalize the data and put it in first, second, or third normal form. Third normal form, getting rid of the data redundancy. The second normal form, making sure that you have IDs and primary keys. And the first normal form, getting rid of the multiple pieces of data in a single field. That is where you want to be when you do all of your databases. You can perfect it even more beyond that, but that's an exercise in an advanced class that gets more into the theoretical than it does into the practical. Third normal form stops at being practical if you want to go beyond that. So if you liked what you saw here, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll look forward to seeing you later. Thanks.